what is Nirvana? There's a common understanding that Nirvana is the reward of practice. So, as it were, we put in the hard yards of meditation, and then at some point we attain Nirvana, which is variously conceived of as a state, probably, in past times possibly a place, but it's something that we attain, like we would attain enlightenment on the same kind of thinking, and keep it. So we go from our ordinary fallen human condition to this state of nirvana. So nirvana is a noun, and associated with that, there's often an image of blowing out a candle. So nirvana is like blowing out a candle. This is an almost complete misunderstanding of what nirvana originally meant. We need to go back to the Buddha's first 3 sermons after his enlightenment. So he gives the first 2 sermons to the 5 ascetics that he practiced with before taking a different path and attaining enlightenment. And the first sermon, he outlines the truth of suffering. So he talks about the 4 noble truths and the noble eightfold path. And in the second sermon, he talks about no self. And he talks to this small group of practitioners in a straightforward way. The third sermon is different. The third sermon is given to a much larger group of practitioners, and it's called the fire sermon. And the reason why it's called the fire sermon is that the Buddha uses the metaphor of fire to describe our ordinary human condition. So he says that our eyes are burning, the objects of our eyes are burning, our mind is burning, our hearing is burning, and so on. So burning is the common theme. And the fires that he describes are what later became known as the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and ignorance. To understand this metaphor, you need to understand that the word for fuel, i.e. what keeps the fire going, and the word for attachment is the same word in Sanskrit. It's upadana, and a similar word in Pali. So the suggestion of the metaphor is that the fires of greed, anger, and ignorance, which consume our lives, are generated and sustained by the fuel of attachment to a self and all things which a self requires. The word nirvana has 2 parts to it. So the prefix nir, N-I-R, means out, and vana means blowing. So at first glance, we think, oh, that fits in quite well with the image of the candle being blown out. But we need to understand 2 things. Firstly, that the word vana has a much broader meaning than our word to blow, which we would think of as a person blowing out. We wouldn't think of it as a person breathing in, and we certainly wouldn't think of it in terms of a general movement in the air, although figuratively we would understand if someone said the wind is blowing. Now, the contemporary monk scholar, a wonderful and generous man called Thanissaro, renders that word nirvana as not blowing. And on his reading of it, what nirvana is not blowing on the flames with a bellows or something like that to keep the fire going. But the point of this word nirvana is that it's a transitive verb. So there's nobody doing the blowing, and there's nobody refraining from doing the blowing. The reference is to the fire blowing. In other words, the fire of greed, anger, and ignorance being sustained by our attachment is drawing in air which also sustains it. And the consequence of us not supplying fuel to the fire is that the fire gradually dies down, and so it isn't blowing, as it were. And that's nirvana. But you can see how this original metaphor can gradually change into the metaphor of blowing out the candle. First, that candle seems much more directly representative of the individual practitioner. It's more satisfying in that it has heat and light. And who else blows out a candle other than the practitioner? But it's almost a complete reversal of the original intention behind that use of the word. And we can see this happening a lot in Buddhism. So it's almost as if Buddhism is not the evolution of ideas, but almost the evolution, the supplementing, the contradiction of images.